What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 of my favorite relationships in video games. In light, of course, of today being Valentine's Day. That said, I'm someone who's very much so on the record for not really caring much about romance in video games, which remains the case, but I am nonetheless a person that enjoys a good story, so while a lot of these certainly don't make or break a gaming experience for me, I did enjoy them, but the concept of romance in video games, period, has always somewhat been a bit of a hard sell for me simply because I have a hard time getting attached to characters in a particularly emotional way. So seeing people get really up in arms about which relationship is the best in any given game has always been a curiosity to me. Because on my side of things, while I enjoy them well enough if they are well written, I also could really care less about their absence at the same time. But I do particularly enjoy when these interactions reveal a side to a character you might not otherwise be aware of, as I do think it can help drive home points about their character. But with all of that out of the way, let's actually dive into it and talk about some of these. So, first and foremost, we have Triss from the Witcher series, and I wanted to start this list with Triss because I think the interactions between her, Yennefer, and Geralt throughout the Witcher series are an especially almost comical one to me because there's a lot of back and forth pretty much anytime you bring up The Witcher about Triss over Yennefer or Yennefer over Triss, etc. And speaking from a purely practical point of view, I think the correct answer in that situation is neither of them because they're both terrible people. Yennefer is a walking superiority complex with the social graces of a 13-year-old, and Triss, while much softer on the ears, so to speak, is honestly a very bad person for manipulating an amnesiac, which in this case is Geralt, of course. But putting aside the fact that, again, the correct choice is neither of them, if you forced me to choose, it's absolutely Triss, and I'd be lying if I said it was any other reason simply than I liked her more than Yennefer. She takes the more generally level-headed approach to things, and is capable of having a conversation that doesn't involve her telling her how much better than you she is. Though ultimately, I would say the final nail in the coffin for this particular decision is a bit more vain, and that is simply because my son didn't get his red hair from me. But moving right along to our second entry, we have another intriguing one because it is a romance that doesn't really have much to do with your main character so much as a party member, and this is Parvati and Junlei, an engineer. You see, The Outer Worlds doesn't feature romance for the main character, and while much of the game has a very comedic tone to it, for some reason they managed to nail this particular side romance from an angle I had never seen before that wound up being incredibly charming from an outside perspective, and for someone like myself who's not wildly into video game romances, this actually turned out to be a fantastic compromise. Parvati herself is already a fairly charismatic character, but her side quests involving basically hooking her up with Junlei, while also navigating the trials of Parvati being ace, that is to say someone disinterested in physical intimacy, makes the quests involving things like setting up a date for this, taking Parvati out drinking to decide what to do next, etc., all manages to land in a fun way that, again, I'd just never seen done in a video game before, so it really stuck with me, and I still think about it these days when I'm thinking up things like this, of course. Keeping it moving, though, third up on the list, we have Lae'zel from the recent Baldur's Gate 3. Lae'zel, of course, being our Githyanki companion, or at least potential companion, or even potentially the Avatar if you choose to play her as your origin character. As I mentioned in my rankings video for the origin characters for that game, Lae'zel is at the top of that list, mostly for a character arc that I think is the most fleshed out, beginning with her being, of course, incredibly hostile to you, the player, as a result of the Mind Flayer tadpoles that she would like to have removed, but needing your help to do so, not to mention the fact that Githyanki in general are very militaristic, and that's an attitude that continues through much of Act 1. But when you start going a bit beyond that, especially in the Githyanki Crash and moving on to Act 3, over the course of time you realize that she's actually been manipulated significantly. Everything that she thinks she knows is quite demonstrably false, and while that's a fantastic character arc in and of itself, seeing that turnaround and the realization that comes with all those things and then how to carry on afterwards, I think is made especially interesting if you're actively romancing Lae'zel, because it starts as something purely physical in nature but manages to, if you want it to, morph into something much deeper exposing a character that in one form or another has been running from basically everything that could make her look weak her entire life, which comes with an extra twist depending on how her story ends, resulting in the consequences of your relationship going one of a few different ways, makes for, in my opinion, some really compelling writing around Lae'zel, and it is by far the character arc in that game that stood out to me the most, even without the romance side of things, but added on to it, I think it just adds a little extra layer to an already great story, and it's definitely worth checking out. But then we have number 4, which is Jack from the Mass Effect series, or the Psychotic Biotic if you prefer. Present in Mass Effect 2 and 3, she serves the role, of course, of a biotic companion, meaning someone that is essentially psychically active, but during her childhood she was experimented on, those powers were amplified to a very strong degree. It's theorized she might be the strongest human biotic there is, but all the experimentation drove her crazy, as it were, and she escaped to pursue a life of crime, which led her to pretty much every unsavory business you can think of. And if you're willing to, as male shepherd, put in the time and effort involved in getting through that hard exterior, you can find out that, like a lot of people, Jack is in fact simply running from her past, her life experiences having taught her to trust absolutely no one. Then you might just find a compelling relationship involved, especially come Mass Effect 3, when you can find that after the trials and travails of the second entry, she goes on to grow up a bit, potentially take on an entire charge of biotic trainees, being able to quite poetically train and develop these future biotics in ways she never had the opportunity to be, as they instead went with the horrendous experiments. Though perhaps in a strange way, I relate a great deal to Jack's character. Having grown up in a rough way that ultimately led me to clam up and hardly talk to anyone, only to grow up and try to be better than that really resonated with me, and to top that off with a serious romantic relationship was one of very few occasions that I actually really enjoyed it, so it of course had to be on this list. And, you know, I like the tattoos, sue me. But that brings us to our final entry in a very, I would say, significant tonal shift. We have Cassandra from the Dragon Age series. And if you aren't sensing a type by now, I don't know what to tell you. Cassandra, though, is a seeker of the Orlesian Chantry, which are effectively the secret police force for the Templars, where Templars require lyrium or magic stones to fuel their abilities, seekers, through a life devoted to training and rituals to prepare them for a year of fasting, prayer, and isolation to effectively make them tranquil before then breaking that tranquility, which is lore stuff for Dragon Age by the way, which grants them their seeker powers. And against the backdrop of Dragon Age's larger setting, the conflict between Templar and mages, and the attempt at keeping broader society safe from demonic possession of mages, but this ultimately leading to overly cruel treatment of them, which led to the rebellion that takes up the crux of most of the games at this point, makes the position of a seeker an interesting one from a party standpoint because of the perspective it can offer on events and the lore. And given Cassandra's position specifically as the right hand of the divine, someone investigating both the events of Act 2, largely almost in an antagonistic manner, only to then become a companion in the third game, an interesting prospect. But as for the romance side of things, it definitely has a sort of, I would say, forbidden love vibe to it, especially if you take an ending where Cassandra here can actually become the new divine, and thus your relationship quite literally isn't allowed, but it can potentially go on in secret. But what I really like about this romance is more that she's a bit of a hopeless romantic against a backdrop that certainly doesn't accommodate that kind of thing, especially in its righteous holy warriors, leads to a character that I think was just a really interesting romance overall, as it's such a departure from her normal character, in a way that doesn't involve deeply rooted trauma, no less. But that is pretty much going to do it for this list. There have been 5 of my favorite romances in video games on this Valentine's Day, proving that even somebody like myself can make a video like this to prove that I am definitely in fact a human being and not an AI. Definitely putting those rumors to rest once and for all. All of that said, I certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about these and more down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.